Hey everyone, it's John Heath here again for Milton Rose Learning with another Let's Learn lesson on D-Day and Europe Campaign 1944. This is from our World War II series. So the war is grinding on to its conclusion. So we're going to look at the context and the causes of the D-Day invasion. Then we will look at a really good chronology for you of this kind of crucial hinge point of the war and help you go and get your notes kind of in order. We'll look at a turning point as well during this critical period, and then we will round off, like always, by looking at the tertiary, secondary and primary significance of the D-Day invasions and the campaigns in Western Europe in 1944. Okay then peeps, so let's dive in. So we've got context and causes first. So what was happening just before the D-Day invasions and what was driving them in the first place? Well, there's quite a few factors as always. So first off then, there was a strategic demand for a second front. So obviously alliances, the Grand Alliance especially, was very difficult to keep cohesive, and we had Soviet pressure. So Stalin in Russia was demanding a major Anglo-American cross-channel invasion to relieve the immense pressure on the Red Army in the east. The Red Army did most of the fighting and dying in World War II. That is sometimes kind of glossed over by Western historians, but they did a lot. They lost a lot of men. And so Stalin was basically saying, well, we're doing all the fighting, you need to get involved more, and we need a cross-channel invasion now. So we were under a lot of pressure from Stalin. And at the Tehran conference in Iran, 1943, Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin formally committed to launching Operation Overlord in May to June 1944. So there is a kind of a date kind of coming together. And it set off, obviously, loads of training, as you can see for visual learners. As soldiers started to train and to prepare for this massive undertaking. Loads of amphibious kind of training was needed for it. So we're under political pressure, to put it mildly. Okay, however, this was not going to be easy, as you can see in the image there. So we had the Atlantic Wall defences. So Hitler wasn't kind of lazy in doing this. He kind of set up what he called Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. And so he set up extensive concrete bunkers, minefields, beach obstacles, all the way from Norway to the Spanish border. They were incomplete, but he was doing a good job up to a point, and you can see some of the coastal defences there that would need to be surmounted. He put Rommel, Field Marshal Rommel, one of his best generals, in control of the Normandy defences to reinforce especially that Normandy coast, and was convinced that the Allied invasion had to be crushed directly on the beaches. That was Rommel's perspective, that when the Allies land, you just literally hit them as hard as you can and you try and drive them into the sea. Okay, that was basically the strategy. Okay, however, as always, there was a countermeasure from the Allies, so there was massive Allied planning and innovation of the D-Day landings. So Operation Fortitude was a massive deception plan used to create fake radio traffic and inflatable armies to convince Hitler that the main strike would not come at Normandy, but would come at the shortest point of the English Channel at the Pas de Calais. So it was a really, really good kind of misinformation campaign. Also, they were very innovative. So we had Hobart's funnies, which were basically like specialised amphibious tanks that could be used to clear minefields on the beaches, and artificial portable harbours called mulberries, which you can see in the image there, which are basically portable harbours that you could just push along the ocean. And they were engineered as well for the assault. So we were getting quite innovative and quite good in terms of operational planning for these D-Day assaults. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on just before D-Day, quite understandably. So let's look now at a really good chronology of the D-Day landings and the 1944 kind of in Europe, and then we'll look at a turning point as well. So first off, a very famous image there of the D-Day landings once we'd got ashore. You can see the scale of this was absolutely huge. So on the 6th of June 1944, the D-Day landings. So there was an airborne spearhead, so over 24,000 British, American and Canadian paratroopers, very brave, dropped behind enemy lines to secure bridges and to silence the German artillery, which could have decimated the landing troops on the beaches. Beach assaults then, so over 156,000 Allied troops landed across 5 Normandy beaches, which you can see. Some just walked across and there was no resistance. Others, like at Omaha Beach, suffered tremendous casualties because the Germans were there ready to kind of mow them down. So it was a bit of a mixed bag on the beach assaults. So yeah, as I said, like bloody Omaha, so US forces faced brutal resistance and heavy casualties on Omaha Beach before they were able to secure a foothold. Okay, so it's a bit of a mixed bag, but we pulled D-Day off, which was extremely difficult. Then, once we're ashore, so June to July 1944, the Battle of the Bocage. The Bocage was basically in Normandy, loads of hedgerows and stuff, and it made it very, very difficult to fight through. It was like a defender's paradise. So dense, ancient Normandy hedgerows called bocage heavily favoured the German defenders, and it stalled the Allied tanks from actually getting forward. That was a real problem early on in the Battle of D-Day and the Battle of Normandy. The battle for a French town a few miles inland called Caen, British and Canadian forces engaged in intense attrition to capture the strategic Caen kind of railroad and the town. But it drew the German panzer divisions into that fight, and that by this time they were starting to fight with the formidable Tiger tanks and things like this, and Panther tanks. So it made the battles particularly difficult. However, nevertheless, we pushed forward an Operation Cobra in July 1944. General Patton, great American general, very swashbuckling, broke through German lines at St. Lo and initiated a rapid mobile war. So we start to break out of the bocage, and the mobile war kind of begins, and they can actually deploy their armour properly. Then August 1944, as you can see in the lovely image there, the Falaise Pocket and the liberation of Paris. So the Falaise encirclement, Allied armies trapped and destroyed the German 7th Army, capturing over 50,000 Axis troops, so almost like blitzkrieg tactics being used against them. The liberation of Paris on the 25th of August, so the French resistance and General Leclerc with the 2nd Army Armoured Division liberate Paris as German forces start to retreat east. So the French are back in play now. And Operation Dragoon as well in the south. So that in southern France, Allied landings opened a secondary kind of front in France. And that brought secondary supply routes and again forced a German withdrawal from the south of France. Okay, so we're kind of pincering the Germans here. And then September to December 1944, Operation Market Garden and the Battle of the Bulge. So there's a lot going on here. So, Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's airborne attempt to seize the Rhine bridges, it did fail. It was a very ambitious operation. That failed to capture the bridges at Arnhem and halts the hopes of ending the war by Christmas. It was a touch too much. I think the Germans still had some fight left in them. And on the 16th of December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes forest, Hitler launched a desperate armoured counteroffensive through the Ardennes to try and split the Allied lines and get towards the Belgian ports, but luckily failed eventually, and Allied air power was able to decimate the German panzer divisions. So, yeah, and alongside as well, I should say, an honourable word for the stubborn defence at Bastion, where American paratroopers held up the Germans for crucial time. So the Battle of the Bulge eventually kind of ended in a strategic defeat for Germany. Okay, so there's a lot going on at this point of the war, isn't there? So we're really turning the tide. And what was the turning point for me? Well, I think it's fairly obvious. I think Operation Overlord, which was basically D-Day, and the Normandy breakout. So we opened up a true two-front war now, We successfully breached Fortress Europe, and it permanently trapped Nazi Germany now in a strategic vice between the east. The Russians were pushing them badly, and then in the west now we're pushing them from the west. So this is a full two-front war. You're never going to win. It's just a matter of time. So it was the destruction as well of the Wehrmacht in the west. The collapse at the Falaise Pocket destroyed Germany's ability to kind of maintain an organised defensive line in Western Europe. They were just literally fighting for survival now, and operational kind of command had kind of collapsed. So we were just kind of pushing them all the way back now to the German borders. Okay. So, with all that in mind, it's a bit breathless. There was a lot going on in this period. But what was the impact and significance of the D-Day invasions and the breakout through Normandy? Well, in terms of tertiary significance for me, so they're not quite as significant events, I think it shaped the post-war European map. So there was a democratic restoration in Western Europe. It ensured that Western Europe was liberated by Anglo-American forces rather than the Soviet Red Army, because if they'd have got to Western Europe, history would have been very, very different. It would have been a communist kind of communist-inspired empire in Western Europe. And it set the Cold War frontier, so it determined that the eventual meeting points of Allied and Soviet armies inside Germany would then create this kind of Cold War borderland, which established itself very, very soon after, pretty much from 1945 after. Then in terms of secondary significance of the D-Day landings and the push out through Normandy, I think total Allied air and industrial dominance. So air supremacy, complete Allied control of the skies now, crippled German troop movements. Most of the time they could only move their panzer divisions at night because the Allied Air Force would just decimate them. Supply trains and fuel depots during the daylight. So like I say, it was move at night or die. It was pretty much as simple as that for a German commander. Logistical supremacy as well, so it demonstrated the unmatched ability of Allied industrial logistics. We'd been busy boys for the last, and busy girls, for the last 2 or 3 years really, and it showed in our logistics, because we could now sustain millions of mechanised soldiers across the Channel and then sustain them when they got to Normandy. Our logistics were very, very good. It's an area which is understudied by historians, but it really contributed to our victory in this period. And the primary significance then, well, again, it's fairly obvious, I believe, the re-establishment of the Western Front. It was the liberation of Western Europe, so it restores sovereignty to France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the nations that had been rolled over by Nazi Germany, stripped Germany of economic and industrial resources, as we know, and it created that unstoppable two-front vice. So Operation Overlord synchronized with the Soviet Operation Bagration in the east, where they smashed Army Group Centre, and so it drove Axis forces inexorably back into Germany. And you can see they were going to be chased all the way by the American forces here. Those tanks were not going to stop until they reached the Elbe River in the middle of Germany. They were going to basically force Germany all the way back to unconditional surrender. Okay, so you can see it's a breathless one, but that was the D-Day invasions and the Allied operations in Western Europe in 1944. So hopefully that's given you a really good primer now to beef up your notes. So don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss another Let's Learn video again. That's always a good outcome. Keep your eyes peeled for the next edition of the World War II series as well. And if you have any notes or anything that you want to kind of add, please do pop it in the comments and we'll always do our best to reply. So it just remains to say, hopefully you've enjoyed that. That's been D-Day invasion, Operation Overlord and the European operations in 1944. Hopefully you've enjoyed yourself. Take care and we'll see you soon.